everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every week, photographers meet here to connect, inspire, and create. And if you'd like to join us live, you'll find the schedule for upcoming sessions on my website at lindanickell.com, as well as the links to previous sessions posted to the Happiness Hour YouTube channel. Every week, my guests share their photography tips and insight into their creative journeys. They inspire us to try something new, and they encourage us to look at a subject a little differently. Tonight's guest is Jose Madrigal. Jose is a macro photographer who has mastered the art of photographing the tiny world of insects. Jose is internationally recognized for his fascinating and stunning pollinator images. But in tonight's presentation, Macro on the Wing, Jose will share the techniques he uses for capturing insects in flight using a macro lens and a flash. He'll talk about lighting, camera settings, and finding the perfect subject. If you're on Instagram, you can find him at jmad_images, and you can connect with him through his website, jmadimages.com. And I'll link all of that information in the show notes. So, Jose, welcome back to the Happiness Hour.
Well, thank you for having me. I got to say, it's been a couple of years, and you really got to polish on that. I mean, you sound like a pro. So hopefully I will be able to keep up with
Yeah,
your level
I'm
of
raising my.
professionalism.
I practice a lot in front of the mirror.
Yeah. Okay.
With the
Nice.
hairbrush. I told you you're 181. So
Yep.
we've come a long way. We just looked this up right before you started. So Jose's presentation tonight might be a little bit more advanced, maybe,
Hmm.
but he did a presentation for us. You can find it on the YouTube channel. It was session number 14, I believe. I hope I did that right. And that he goes over the basics. So if you want to get if you need to polish up on your basics before you jump to this session, go back and hit rewind and get that information, because he did a really good job at breaking it down and getting us to, at a level where we can all start. So, all right, with that, Jose, what did I miss? Anything exciting you want to share? It's been a while.
Um, well, I think if we launch into it, I've got the very first panel is about a little bit about me and what's been going on. So I'll go ahead and launch into that. Okay, so as Linda mentioned in the previous presentation, I basically it was called Pollinators Magnified, I think was the name that we used, and it was really about general macro photography and close-up photography, and then the thing that I'm most known for is capturing insects in flight. And so there was quite a bit of time spent with that, but more in the general sense. And I really wanted to emphasize, and I'll say that again today, that learning first with natural light is always going to be better. Learning with a telephoto lens is always going to be the way to get the techniques down, because it gives you a little bit more room for error. You can shoot from a little bit further away. You don't have to worry about if you're dealing with a skittish subject. Sometimes when you approach with this giant diffuser, and you don't know how to do it, or you don't know which subjects are okay with it, you'll spend a lot of time frustrated. And then also, like I said, because you have a lot less room for error, I just always recommend starting off with the telephoto lens. And then once you've got that down, it's like learning to first hit a 45-mile-an-hour fastball, and then advancing up to a 60-mile-an-hour fastball, and then advancing up to a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. So what I would say is the 45-mile-an-hour fastball, that's um, shooting through the telephoto lens. The 60-mile-an-hour fastball, that's going to be going to the macro lens, where you've got to be a whole lot closer to the subject now. And then adding the flash, that's the 90-mile-an-hour fastball. And it's definitely more challenging. You can't rely on continuous rolling shutter like you can with natural light. You have to click at the right moment. And so, like I said, you just got to be a lot more precise and a lot more experienced with what you're doing. But having taught one already in the past where I went over the more general in-flight macro photography, I thought it would be good to, rather than just repeat the same stuff, is to go a little bit more in depth about the techniques that I use to capture them in flight. And as you can see there on the screen, that shot there is shot using flash and macro lens. And so I'll talk about some of the different things as we go throughout here. Um, to get different types of backgrounds, to make sure that you're getting a real clear, crisp subject, and go a little bit, like I said, a little bit more into the technical details as opposed to just the general things. Having said that, I am still going to give a little bit of a synopsis about the general things. So in case you don't remember some of them, or especially as we just got another month or two left of winter, and you might be thinking about what you want to work on for this spring when you get out and start shooting. Hopefully, you'll have some good stuff to take with you. All right, so a little bit about me. This is similar to last time, except that I now have a cool picture of myself shooting in the field. And if you notice, the guy who got that picture of me also managed to get the bee in focus right there on that shot. So I was pretty excited to have that's a shot that I've wanted of myself for a long time. That to me is a perfect self-portrait of me. I've been a lifelong artist, first as a sketch artist. I can draw photorealistic, but then in my teens, I got into music. And then more recently, photography has become really my more what I call my truest art of all of them, because it's the one that I think has come from the purest place where I can honestly say that I care more about people recognizing my work than recognizing me. In the past, and maybe part of that is age too. I think as you get older, you quit worrying so much about things like that. But I've definitely enjoyed that with photography. That like I said, that's really what I get excited about it, like a parent gets excited about their kids, you know. Um, I my emphasis in photography is going to be nature photography, and then specifically macro photography and landscapes. I've been starting to do a lot more landscapes lately, although they're not on my website yet. But that's one of the things with the break that I'll have over the next couple of months that I should be building up that page on my website. Still Texas focused though. I've been published internationally. I was telling Linda before we started that I've been doing a lot of shows, and that's really what I've realized that I enjoy the most in photography. You know, everybody tends to find their thing that they do, whether they get paid for it or not. And I like doing shows. I like as she mentioned, I like teaching. I like talking to people, and then doing art festivals and different shows like that where I get to show my work. I really enjoy meeting people and seeing the reaction to my work. It's all like I said, that's where I have found that I really uh, love doing it. Have a passion for Texas native wildlife. And more recently, specifically beekeeping. I was also telling Linda that I one of my best audiences has been beekeepers over the last few years. I've really found a good market with them. They love my pictures, and so that has really kind of become it's always bees have always been, particularly honeybees, have always been one of my favorite subjects. But especially seeing the passion and the interest and the opportunity. I really decided to narrow in my focus and make them, the vast majority of what I do these days, photography wise. With that, I've also started beekeeping, but I just started that last year, so don't ask me any questions about it other than who to refer you to for help. All right, so let's move on. If you've attended the previous time or watched any of my other presentations or been to a live workshop, which I will do one or two live workshops this spring, you'll know that my very first tip is always to study the subject. You've got to get to know the subjects that you're dealing with. um, their behaviors are going to cue you in as to what are going to be the best times to shoot. Um, with with bees in particular, gathering pollen is one of my favorite times, and that's actually you'll see when we get a little bit more in depth. That's actually the situation that I look for the most with doing the flash photography because it's an opportunity where I can plan the shot a little bit more. When they're doing some of the other activities, such as, oh, and I'll zoom in on this shot. Um, and you can see all the settings there. This was shot with flash, f10, 1/250th of a second, and ISO 200. So in addition to gathering pollen, guarding a nest, like in a situation like this, I could probably do it with flash, but they're a little bit more, this particular type of bee is a little bit more skittish, and finding them guarding a nest is a little bit trickier and involves usually a little bit of luck. You just happen to stumble upon it. Whereas, like I said, with the gathering pollen, I know specifically which flowers to go to, what fields to go to, and things like that. Zoom in a little bit on that. And this one was shot with a telephoto lens and natural light. The next situation that I look for is seeking a mate. This is a male queen butterfly. Um, it's a queen that identifies as a male, right? Or something like that. Anyway, this one was shot with a telephoto lens, and the way that I was able to get this shot, he was trying to mate with a female who was on a flower, and he was hovering behind her, and so I got to the front side, and obviously that's a shot that if I was using flash, I'd have to get in a lot closer than they would probably be comfortable with. So think in terms of that as well. And when you're choosing whether you're going to shoot with telephoto lens or shoot with a macro lens and up close and use that flash, try to be considerate of the subjects and realize that some of them don't like having you around, and some of them you'll find really don't mind as long as you don't move quickly or don't try to touch them or anything like that. Um, there's also patrolling a territory. This shot here of two dragonflies is a perfect example of what dragonflies will do a lot of times when there's two males guarding a particular area. They'll start jousting, and this species in particular, the blue dasher. If you've been to one of my workshops, I think Linda has a picture of these guys. They're one of the ones that will more often hover. They don't always hover, but they'll give you some opportunities. And one of the things that these guys in particular do when they're jousting like this is that they'll fly like this over each other and kind of hover, and the one on the bottom will fly up towards the one on the top, and then they'll take off into the sky and get into battle. It's pretty interesting to watch. But once they start to do that, you've lost a shot because they get going pretty fast then. The other situation is going to be visiting popular flowers, and that kind of ties in with the gathering pollen. Um, if you've been again to one of my workshops, you know how much I love the prickly white poppies or blue stem poppies that we have here in Texas. We have tons of them. They grow on the roadsides, and bees love them because they're real heavy with pollen. And what you'll see from the bees is this the opportunity to get this kind of a shot right here, because what they do is they get onto the flower, they tussle around in the flower and get all covered with pollen, and then they'll hover next to it to kind of clean the pollen off of their face and body and put it down into the scopa on the legs, or with honeybees, they have actual pollen sacs. And and so they'll gather all that pollen down onto the legs, and then they'll go back onto the same flower, and they'll sometimes do that 3 or 4 times before they move on to the next flower. So that's one of my favorite opportunities to photograph a bee in flight. I did want to point out with this shot, it looks like it's using flash, but I actually used a video light. I was experimenting with a video light last spring, doing a little bit of video work, and I wanted to get a shot of this bee flew into the area that I was a little bit unexpectedly, and so I wanted to get some still shots of her, and so I switched over, but utilized the video light to capture that, and still got a what I think is a really cool shot. Um, This was actually the winner, if you notice at the bottom of the 2023 Native Plant Society of Texas, the East Central Texas Plains region. I entered several shots, and I also, I'll mention this real quickly now because I don't have a slide of it later, but I also got Best of Show for that. So pretty excited about that. I've never done photo contests prior to, actually, I think in my first or second year, I entered a couple of photo contests, but then I just kind of quit doing that. But I did enter a few last year, and fortunately had some good results. So the next type of situation that I look for is returning to a perch. This is more so with dragonflies. Um, and again, using a telephoto lens is going to be a whole lot easier with dragonflies. I really absolutely dead set on getting a shot this year of a dragonfly, or this is actually a damselfly, but a dragonfly or a damselfly in flight using flash and the macro lens. That's going to be my mic drop, and uh, officially hang up my camera after that probably because it's such a hard shot to get. They're super skittish. Even getting them in flight with the telephoto lens, as some of you already know, it's a really challenging shot to get. They're not very cooperative, and to get in close enough to get a shot with a macro lens and for the flash to be effective, which I'll talk a little bit about what effective flash means. It really there is a tough subject, but like I said, I've gotten really really close. This last season, I got a few shots that I'm okay with, but not in love with, and so this season, that's the big hairy goal. All right. Also approaching a nest. This is a sand wasp. This was actually one of the first shots that I got using macro lens and diffused flash. And what was so neat about this is that I noticed her sand wasps when they're building a nest, they'll go in and dig a little bit, and then they'll take off to get some provisions. They'll come back, go down into the nest. They put things in there to feed the young, and sometimes they're just spending a little bit of extra time cleaning it out. But at any rate, they're always going to hover a little bit as they come down. They'll hover in stages like about a foot above the hole, and then about a half foot, and they'll slowly go down. And in watching that, I basically waited when she left. I got myself positioned, so I was real close and didn't really disturb her or make her, any sudden moves. I just waited, and it was a good 10, 15 minutes of sitting there waiting in that one spot under this Texas sun. But like I said, from when she finally came back, I managed to get a side shot and a quarter shot, and then this frontal shot that I was just really thrilled with. You could actually see, this was my first time being able to see the individual eye units in an in-flight shot. And so I was just ecstatic about it, and that's one of the things that shooting with flash and with the macro lens, it's going to let you see some amazing details in a way that you've never seen before, and that you can't quite capture with telephoto. Watch for the hover. That's the final tip on studying the subject. Hover flies are a really great subject to learn on because they do tend to hover right next to a flower for a longer period of time. You'll also find some when it's kind of mating season. The males will a lot of times just hover in one spot for a long period of time, like several minutes straight. And so if you happen to find one like that, it's a good opportunity to practice using your focusing and getting your camera to line up. The thing that I often liken it to shooting the flying subjects with a macro lens. It's kind of like trying to get a shot of the moon through a telephoto lens at like 800 millimeters and without any in-camera body stabilization. And if you've ever done that, you know that and the moon's not even moving like these guys move, but your movements are extremely exaggerated. And so kind of think about it like that. And so realize that it's going to take some practice. The cameras are definitely getting more advanced now, and so it is making it easier. I now have the Sony A1. This was shot with the A7R III, but I now have the A1, and I can honestly admit that it does make it a lot easier to grab the subject. But if I didn't have the experience with the A7R3, I think that I would have still struggled with the A1. So no matter what camera you have, what equipment you have, you're going to have to spend some time practicing, getting used to locking focus on on the subject right away. And I'll go into a few more of those details as we go along here. Um, First of all, with using flash, my first tip is, or second tip on this type of photography is picking the right light. Um, you want light to, well, you know what? Let me take that back. I was about to say you want the light to be big, soft, and diffuse. I like the light to be big and diffuse, which means you need to be close to the subject, and it gives you soft and even lighting. That's typically considered the gold standard for good lighting. Um, and I'll zoom in real quickly on this shot so you guys can see the level of detail that you're able to get when you are able to capture a subject at extreme close up. Um, this was shot at f13, 1/200th of a second, and the ISO 500. And you may be saying, well, how in the world, do you freeze a subject like that at just 1/200th of a second? Well, you do that with flash. The speed light, and I'll go into the details a little bit later, is going to serve as your the thing that freezes the subject. And like I said, I'll explain all that coming up shortly. This shot, I'll also one more little brag here, was a finalist in the 2023 Nature Conservancy contest, in the macro section, but unfortunately didn't win. I know the guy who did well. I know him via Instagram, and so I can't help but congratulate him. It was an amazing shot that he got of a spider with a lot of little babies all over it. So really impressive shot. But just the fact that it uh, went to the finalist round, getting that email from them saying, congratulations, your photo has advanced to the final round of judging, was a really exciting thing to receive. And because getting to where I can capture a shot like this has definitely putting in a lot of work. Um, so when you get a little further away from the subject, you're going to have harder light and you're going to have longer shadows. Now, having said that, it's not necessarily worse. If you think about one example that I like to give with that harder light, if you think about when you're shooting the moon, if you shoot the moon when it's a full moon, you don't really get to see the details of the craters. When it's more of a gibbous moon, that's when you're going to be able to see more of the craters because you got longer shadows, and so those are going to be a little bit more defined. And so you may find the same thing with macro photography and other types of photography. I've always been somebody, if you listen back to the original tape that from this show that I did with Linda a couple of years ago, that I don't ever try to tell anybody what's right. You got to decide what you enjoy doing and what feels right for you in terms of photography. Um, but you know, this make just make a deliberate choice. Don't just accidentally take pictures. Now you're going to do a lot of happy accidents early on, but once you get some of those happy accidents, pay attention to what those settings were and what caused that to happen, and try to replicate that to where it becomes a skill instead of just an accident. And so, like in this shot here, and when you're shooting moving subjects like this, there's always going to be a little bit of a happy accident involved because you can't always get as close as you want. They're unfortunately aren't going to pause for you right where you want them to. So you're going to get some shots from a little further away and some a little bit closer. And what I like about this shot is that it allows you to see the difference in shooting from a little bit further away. The light is a little bit harder here. You can see that the highlights are a little bit harsher. and the shadows are a little bit darker. And you can also see a little bit of ghosting. If you look at by the tip of the antenna, you can notice like a gray, darker, almost black antenna ghost underneath it. And that's one of the things that happens when you don't completely block the ambient light, which is what happened by being a little bit further away from the subject. Now that actually looks cool to me. It's got almost like a 3D pop out effect. So like I said, don't be afraid of not getting what you think is a perfect shot or a perfectly technical shot all the time. Get out there and have fun and be open to some of the happy accidents and to learning from them. Um, the next thing with picking the right light is deciding whether you want just um, artificial light or if you want a balance of natural light with that. Like in this shot here of a bee on some bluebonnets, that's a blend of natural light. And the way that I was able to get this is by essentially blocking the sun, shooting at a time when the angle of the sun was pretty low, and getting in the way of that sun direct onto the subject, but then the sun is still a little bit in the background, so it lights up the background for you while you're putting your subject in shadow, and that's the only thing that lit up the subject. So you got still a crisp wing, lots of detail, but like I said, you have a little bit more color in the background. Um, Another thing that I look for in picking the right light is like I just mentioned, creating a little bit of shade, but look for shady, naturally shady areas. In this shot here, there's actually a tree line in the background. You can kind of tell that the trees are ending towards the top of the bee's head, and it's getting a little bit more light up there, and there's some natural sky back there. But it was also a cloudy day, so that helped. Um, you you'll want to um, I see cloudy days as one of my favorite days to get out and shoot when I'm wanting to shoot with artificial light, because like I said, it becomes my friend for keeping out ambient light. Now when you're doing that, like I said, you're going to have to like that dark background, which I happen to really like. And I think a lot of macro photographers tend to like getting that dark background, but sometimes we want a bright background. Sometimes we want a colorful background. And so knowing how to achieve each of those is going to be important for you. But for this, like I said, for the darker background, making sure you're shooting, having a dark tree line behind you can help. A cloudy day can help. Open shade. There's a lot of different things that you can do to help you out there. Um, this is an example where it wasn't quite it was a little too bright, so and you can see what happened with the wings. The wings kind of disappeared because they got a little bit too much ambient light. Also, the subject was a little bit further away from me, so you can tell that like on the eye that the light is a little bit, the highlights are a little bit harsh. Also along the body, it's just not a smooth fall off on the and feathering on the highlights and shadows. So um, not a shot that I'm crazy about, but again, that's my artistic choice. So um, try not to define too much of your artistic choices from what other people are doing. One of the best things that you can have as an artist and as a photographer is your own style. So always remember that. This is a another example of a good shot with using a blend of natural light and my diffused flash. With this is a California digger bee. Got pretty good blocking of the natural light on the subject, so you can see pretty well the wings there. But the background is also fairly well lit. This was actually shot out in West Texas, and you guys can see there on the settings. Um, One of the things that I'll mention here, you can see my ISO is a little bit higher than on some of the previous shots using flash where it's closer to ISO 200. Um, I a lot of times for me, the shutter speed is a little quicker to adjust than the ISO on my camera, and I just have it set up that way. I'm sure I could set it up to where it'd be quicker to adjust the ISO, but I like it the way that it is. And so if I'm in a situation where I feel like I need a little bit more um, ambient light or a little bit more just total light for the whole composition. I'll adjust sometimes the ISO and set that where I want it, and that way I can, depending on whether I'm shooting into light or away from light, or if I've got too much ambient light bleeding in, I can adjust via just the shutter speed. Because then the essentially what the shutter speed does when you're shooting with flash is it really becomes a way to control ambient light. So you'll think about it more like that than about freezing the subject.
So Jose, before can you go back to that one?
Yeah, yeah.
Danielle's got a question. It's about your
Mhm.
speed light. She's just curious, what is your speed light set to?
The speed light is at 1/16th power, and I've actually got a whole section coming up on the speed light and the settings for that I use for that and why.
Okay.
But I can go ahead and touch on it just a little bit. Um, and that's that, at 1/16th power. So the power of the speed light is not just a the brightness of the pop. It's the duration of the pop. 1/16th power, it's the duration of the flash is going to be quick enough that it's going to freeze the subject. So that's what I do there. But like I said, I'll go a lot more into detail about those settings and all of that. All right, so same thing here, same settings. Actually, I think it was probably on the same day, and so similar light, similar situation. So like I said, same settings there. F13, um, I've been going even as high as F16, primarily thinking of the aperture as a way to get more depth of field, and rather than a way to get more light in. And so getting that aperture, like I said, at about F13 to F16 is kind of more where I've been lately, whereas I used to be closer to F10 because I wanted more light when I was shooting more with natural light. Um, this one, this is actually a type of hoverfly, and I like this shot not only because it's a cute pose, but also because you're able to see a little bit of wing motion. The way that I'm not sure, excuse me, I'm not sure exactly what the power was on the flash for this shot exactly, but I'm gonna guess it was closer to about 1/8 power or 1/4 to 1/8 power. And that when you've got that brighter shot, you've also got a longer duration. And so it's going to allow a little bit more movement. Um, and it's not going to freeze the subject quite as much. All right, so having the right tools, we'll get into now specifically like the type of equipment that I use. I have the Sony A1, as I mentioned. I had the A7R3 prior to that because it's a mirrorless camera, so it's really fast focusing. It's got a lot of megapixels, so it allows me to crop because like in all of those shots, I'm having to crop in. Even when you get it 1:1 with these subjects, they're so small that they only take up maybe a quarter of the screen. And so you're still going to have to crop in when you get the picture. And so having plenty of megapixels, full frame, I definitely like full frame versus crop sensor. You can get some really, really great shots with current crop sensor cameras, but the dynamic range just isn't quite as good. You have larger pixels on a full frame, so they gather more light, and so like I said, the dynamic range is going to be a little bit better. Um, you also want to think about the working distance of the lens. I actually now recently got the new Sony 70 to 200. This is a telephoto lens that has macro, and it's not as sharp as my 90, so I don't think that I'll use it as like my primary lens for capturing artistic prints, but it is a really great walking around lens. And one of the things that it does that I think is really cool is it has this full-time direct manual focus, which basically allows you to have like a combination of autofocus and manual focus. So it'll autofocus on the subject, but if you've ever had the situation where it autofocuses, but it grabs something behind the subject and then it just stays locked on that thing behind the subject, with the direct manual focus, you can grab the focusing ring, give it a little spin, and pull it in back into the subject that you want it to lock onto, and it'll adjust for you with that. So that's a really cool feature. But the downside, one of the big downsides with this camera, or with this lens, I should say, is that working distance. I have to shoot from a little bit further away, which in some senses with natural light is a real positive. So I'll probably really use this a lot with video work. Um, and because like I said, it really helps with that direct manual focus. And with video, I was finding that it would really help a lot having that feature. But the other thing with flash, as I mentioned earlier, is you get further away, you get harsher light. And so I want the flexibility of being able to get close enough to get that good soft light, or be able to shoot from further away and have a little bit harsher light if I need to. But with this one, the working distance being a little bit further, I can't get quite as close to the subject and just get that really good surrounding light that I want. So think about that in terms of the lenses that you're buying, in terms of the lenses that you want to use with your macro photography. Get to know what is the sharpest range of your lens. It's going to be typically about f8 to about f13 with most lenses. That's just kind of a standard thing with just about any lens from just about every manufacturer out there. Shooting in manual mode versus auto mode. I definitely recommend shooting in manual mode on your camera, getting comfortable with setting your own aperture, your own shutter speed, and your own ISO, because your camera, when you're in auto mode, it's always going to try to adjust the exposure for you. And I like to have control over the exposure and make sure that I'm exposing for the subject and not for the whole scene. So uh, keep that in mind. Um, the equipment that I have, like I said, is a Sony A1, that 90 millimeter macro lens that you can see there in the picture. The Nikkell close-up lens kit, which my favorite thing with the Nikkell close-up lens kit, you can use it on a telephoto lens. If you have a telephoto lens doesn't have already macro capabilities, it'll actually turn the lens into a macro lens. So that's pretty cool. But my favorite thing, I use it on the macro prime lens, because what it does is it works like a bit of a focus limiter. It keeps your lens from being able to hunt too far into the background, and so it really helps with finding a subject. And especially with the in-flight macro photography, it's going to be really helpful to you. The Godox V863 flash, I think in the previous time I had the V862, and I have a couple of those still. The upgrade, it's not a huge difference. Really like that it's got just a little better mechanism for locking onto the camera, and and the battery's better, so it recycles a little faster, and you have a lot more flashes. Like I think you have about 200 more full power flashes from this flash. The AK diffuser, macro flash diffuser, that is just a phenomenal diffuser. It for what I was talking about. It's going to help you shoot at a fairly low power and still get really great light. It's gonna, because it amplifies the light and then softens it, and so it just and surrounds the subject. As you can see, it's like a hood over the end of the lens, and creates the same effect as putting an umbrella on a flash when you're shooting a portrait of somebody. It just gives that soft surrounding light, rather than harsh direct light. Um, and that's a little front view of that diffuser. And I already mentioned the 70 to 200. All right, now let's get a little bit more into the settings and where I'll end up hitting on the power of the flash as well. All right, so the shutter typically start at about 1/200th of a second, but as you can see, that range can go anywhere from about 1/25th of a second all the way up to 1/250th, and even as you saw in some of the pictures, as high as 1/400th of a second. The A1 has allows me to shoot all the way up to 1/400th of a second without having to do the high speed sync. The A7R3, I think it capped out at 250. But when you're shooting with flash and using the flash to freeze the subject, you can really go as low on the shutter as you want. You could go 80th of a second, 1/60th of a second, as long as you're not getting too much ambient light in. Because as like I said, we'll go into in just a second, the flash is really what's going to do the job of freezing the subject. The ISO typically anywhere between about 100 and 800. It just again it depends on the ambient light settings. Is it a really bright day? Am I in good shade? Or am I in too much shade? Is it a little too dark of a day? Also, the subject is going to make a difference. Some subjects, um, darker bees that are just solid black, you're going to have to increase the exposure a little bit. Lighter bees, you're going to want to decrease that a little bit, or you'll overexpose them. So you got to pay attention to all of those things, and it just takes a little bit of practice of finding out best settings for each type of subject. I will say at this point, just because I thought about it now, as far as each subject, having a favorite subject, I think is a good thing. You know, as I mentioned, honeybees have become my favorite subject because of the opportunities that have opened up for me with them. And just because I love them. It was a which came first kind of thing. You know, I was definitely into bees before the opportunities came in there, and then it just accelerated when the opportunities continued opening up. But having a favorite subject is good because it allows you to really practice over and over. It allows you to learn one of the most important things in being appropriately self-critical as a photographer is to know the difference between a good shot and a great shot of yours. You know, and you've got to get enough good shots to where you can start saying, okay, this one's good, but it's not great, and to find that one that has something really special about it and to recognize what that is. All right, moving on to my aperture settings, going to be anywhere, like I said, between f9, f16. I'm typically starting these days at around f13. Um, the spot lock autofocus, I say using a smallish spot because that means I use as small of a spot as I can get away with. The different subjects, I'm going to need to use a little bit of a larger spot. But using the selective spot type of autofocus basically puts a little box on the screen as you see that black screen there on the back. I can see it looking through the viewfinder or on the back of my camera. And then I can move that spot around to different points so that I can compose the way that I want to, and then that's going to be where it tries to grab the subject later. I like to use either continuous shutter on a low setting so that it doesn't continue trying to shoot faster than the flash can keep up with, or just single shots. Primarily when shooting with flash, it's just going to be a single shot because of how quickly they move in and out of focus, and with the flash needing time to recycle. I can click pretty quickly, and if you guys get a chance to see me shooting sometime this season, come out to a workshop or something like that, you'll see that when I find a good subject, I'll be clicking almost as fast as a continuous on a low speed would shoot. So I'll get about 2 or 3 shots per second. Um, then the flash on manual 1/16th power, and what that 1/16th power gives me is about 1/4000th of a second in T1 time. And I know what you guys are asking. What the heck is T1? T1 is basically a term that's used for flash duration. You'll see cameras described or flashes, I'm sorry, described using either T1 or T5. And T1 is how long it takes for light from your flash to dissipate by 90%. And so that's a good measure of the duration. And I have a table coming up. So all you nerds out there, hang tight. It's coming. T5 is often what's listed by manufacturers because it sounds faster. So they'll list like these outrageous flash, the speed of flash of from like 1/1000th of a second up to 1/100,000th of a second. And when they're saying that, they're most likely talking about the T5 time. The T1 time um, is going to be less, and it's more important that you know what that T1 time is in order to avoid ghosting. Because if you're relying on that T5 time for the duration, you're still having almost 50% of the light still dissipating after the time that it should have been. Um, if you're shooting fast enough, then it probably won't matter. But as you start experimenting with this, you'll start seeing the value of knowing that. So how can you know your T1 times of your flash? Google searches allow you to find general specs and sometimes specific brand specs. The Godox that I shoot with, fortunately, it tells the T1 times, but it only tells you a range. It doesn't tell you specifically. But through knowing the range, which is 1/300th of a second at 1 to 1 power, all the way to down to 1/20,000th of a second at 1/256 power. It's a lot of numbers to I have to say without getting tongue twisted. Um, with just knowing that range, I was able to compare to some others that do actually list their numbers and was able to come up with a chart that is I emphasize approximate specs, but these should be pretty spot on, pretty close to accurate, and really you don't need to know the exact number. You do just need to know an approximate number of where you need to be in order to freeze motion. And you want to be over 1/2500th of a second of flash duration to freeze motion. So I just go straight to 1/16th power. As you see here on this chart, at about 1 to 1, you're only at 1/300th of a second of flash. So if you're at full power on your flash, it's not going to freeze the motion. You're going to get blurring and ghosting. And so think about that in terms of where you set your flash. A lower power is also going to recycle faster, so you can shoot multiple times in a row before your flash decides that it needs a break. And so again, having a good diffuser is going to be super important when you're shooting at that low of a power, because without it, it's not really going to be powerful enough to light up the subject adequately. And of course, the light's going to look a lot better through a diffuser. Alrighty. I do with some of this that I've got up here. Let me go through these. 1/16th power is that sweet spot that I've found with my Godox flashes. It's a great amount of light as long as it's properly diffused. It's great at freezing the subject at about 1/4000th of a second of duration, and gives me those fast recycle times for shooting. Yeah, before I move on to that next area, let me stay here. Does anybody have any questions on any of this? It seems like the type of thing that people might want to have a question or two about, and I want to take a moment to answer specifically about this if it's out
Nope,
there.
not yet.
No?
Type,
Okay.
type faster, but I'm not seeing anything yet.
Okay. I'm moving through fast because I am noticing that the time there, and so definitely want to
Yeah.
give an opportunity for people to ask questions if they want. All right. This next shot, talking about grabbing the subject. As I mentioned, I look for subjects when they're gathering pollen, particularly with bees. That's one of the best ways to find them. Find them on their favorite flowers because they'll visit that same flower over and over. before they move on to another flower, and that's going to be a flower that's pollen heavy. You'll get to know as you spend time out there in the field. You'll start realizing that there's sometimes that they're foraging for pollen. There's other times they're foraging for nectar. When they're foraging for nectar, they're going to spend about 2, 3 seconds on the flower at most, and then boom, right off to the next flower. They'll spin around on it almost, and actually literally spin around on the flower, getting a few drinks, and then off to another flower. When they're gathering pollen, they're going to take a little bit more time on the flower, kind of crawling around in it, and then they're going to hover next to it a little bit, and then get back onto the flower. Not all bees do that. A lot of bees do, but a lot of bees don't. And so the more time that you spend out there in the field, the more you get to know the different types of bees and their behaviors, and which ones are going to be good subjects for you to be able to capture in flight. Um, so what I'll do is I'll pre-focus. I'll set that like in this picture here. I wanted the subject, on 1/3 of the screen, and the flower on the other third of the screen. And so I set my focusing spot to the right third, and then but then focus on the flower first while the bee is on the flower, and then move my composition over so that the spot is next to the flower, waiting for the bee to fly off and hover next to it. And so then once the bee pops off of there, then you just use your back button. You can set your back button if it's not already set that way. Most cameras today you can customize, and I use the back button on mine as essentially as a half shutter, as a focusing button. But your standard shutter button, you can also half depress. Either one is an okay option. I like having that back button because it keeps me from accidentally firing when I don't want to, and make sure that I've got the subject locked in. Now, as far as the subject being locked in, um, the thing that I've learned is to shoot almost a millisecond before it's actually in focus. As you start to notice the little lights or whatever that it start to indicate on your camera that the subject is in focus, almost an instant before that happens, you have to click, because by the time it's got locked on to focus, because even when they're hovering, they're still bouncing around in and out of your field of focus, and forward and back, and so grabbing them is still going to be a challenge. But like I said, if you see them as they're coming into focus, you learn to anticipate the shot, and recognizing that they're about to come into optimal focus, and you click right at that moment, and then you'll usually nail them in perfect focus on the eyes, or at least on a good portion of the body. And it does take practice to develop a sense for this. Even like after a winter of not shooting a lot, and I get out in spring, I usually have a day or two of kind of getting reacclimated to getting that timing just right, and getting the focus just right as well. Because when you're watching for them, and then you have to pick up your lens and focus right on the right spot, that takes precision. And some people have it. They just but I that's not something that I have. I always have to. It took me a while to get really precise with focusing that lens on where I am seeing with my eyes. And so, like I said, it's something that I always end up having to come back to a little bit each season, and fine tuning that. All right, and so on this one, I did not put the settings for that. I thought I had, but this is a Savastra bee. That is actually the sunflower bee, is what its known name is. Although that's not a sunflower, I think that's just a little aster or a daisy. Um, but at any rate, as I mentioned a little bit earlier about being appropriately self-critical, do that, but don't get handcuffed by your technique or by technical aspects. Happy accidents happen in nature, photography, and then they happen in nature photography all the time. Think about creating art and about having fun, and practice a lot, because it's it's definitely more fun if you're coming home with some shots that you're excited about. And so have fun exploring, have fun creating, but then also put the necessary work into developing the skill to where you can, like I said, just really take your work to another level. I've got, like Linda said, she'll have links to each of my social media and website, but there they are there on the last page. And yeah, I think that's the end. And I finished in a little better time this time than last time.
That's
So
okay.
I think I'm pretty close to an hour there, right?
No, it's perfect. And it's, it's good information. So it's kind of like, oh no, we're not ready for you to go.
All
Okay, let,
right, cool.
let me get you to pull down your screen. I've got a couple of
Yep.
questions in here. Let me throw those at you if you don't mind.
Yep.
This was, I think Karina had her question right around the photo. It was the guarding the nest photo. So her
hmm
question is, are you shooting using a tripod?
No, I don't like a tripod. The only thing that I use tripod for is for Milky Way photography, and sometimes for landscapes. But even with landscapes, I'm a handheld shooter. Um, I like the freedom of being able to follow a subject around. When I find a good subject, I want to be able to follow it from flower to flower. Because like I mentioned, they'll go back to the same flower multiple times, but then they'll move on to another flower, and then they'll do the same thing at that next flower. And so I want to be able to be free to just walk on over there and shoot handheld. I set the shutter fast enough or the flash fast enough to take care of freezing the motion, even if I didn't have good image stabilization. But like I said, with everything that advanced as cameras are these days, you can really shoot handheld and get just as sharp as you would on a tripod.
Okay. Dory's question was, are there any insects that are light sensitive where it would be better just using ambient light?
Um, You know, I've never seen any insects seem to be bothered with flash. Interestingly, there is a nocturnal bee in Texas, and it's called the nocturnal sweat bee, and it is a Texas native. I photographed it, and I put it on my Instagram. I think last spring or maybe a little before that. But it like a lot of night flying insects, they're attracted to light. They fly right to lights, to headlights, and so I think that um, I think that they're able to adjust for it. And like I said, I've never noticed any. Um, it seemed to affect them in any negative way. And I've shot a lot, primarily the honeybees with flash, but as you guys saw, a number of other bees. But they seem to just continue going about their business without any interruption.
Okay. Okay, this is off subject, but we're going to ask you anyway.
Okay.
I can't remember. It was, oh, Jan, how do you clean your mirrorless Sony? Do you?
I send it to Sony.
Yeah, that's what I would be doing too. It scares me.
Um, Yeah, I've never cleaned the sensor other than there's a setting that you can go to that will basically vibrate the sensor and get dust off of it, or using the blowers, to blow out any dust or specks. They sell kits where you can clean the sensors, and I've heard some people say that it's really not that big of a deal. But Fortunately, I've only ever had one camera that ever got any spots on it that wouldn't come off through just um, using one of the blowers. Uh, but uh, but even with that, it wasn't a bad enough spot that I felt like I could just edit it out in Photoshop. So unfortunately, I don't have a better answer than that, other than that, Sony. I did sign up with my A1 for a free annual cleaning and I haven't used it yet. So thank you for reminding me because I paid extra for that. I need to send it in right now before season starts back up.
Say the cost of these cameras, I just wouldn't mess with trying to save, $100.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, Sharon's got a question. Do you use your in-body stabilization?
Yes. Yeah, I do use that. It does help steady the camera, which, as I mentioned earlier in the comparison to taking a picture of the moon, when you're shooting handheld, having the advantage of the in-body stabilization is gonna help you to stay locked in on one general area a little bit better as opposed to being all shaky like that at the same time as the bees all moving around. So
All right. I think I caught all the questions. I think you're going to be kind of tickled to see all of these nice comments about how inspiring your work is and sharing so much information with this group. So
oh, thanks.
that's it was good, Jose, but I knew what I was getting. So
Thanks. Thanks.
it's like I know. All
No.
right. Let me thank you so much for coming back and doing this. And
Yeah.
hopefully our paths will cross in person sooner rather than later. But I
Yeah.
so appreciate you coming to do this. I know that you got plenty of other things that you could do on a Wednesday night, but I'm glad that you made time for us. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. It was absolutely my pleasure. Because I could tell I felt like I was going a little bit too fast. It's been a little while since I've done one of these presentations, so I enjoyed the experience, especially since I've got a couple, as I mentioned to you, some live ones, and maybe I'll mention that here before everybody tunes out that if you're in the Houston area, I'm doing an in-person workshop. It's called the Lunch and Learn at the Mercer Botanical Garden. That'll be the Wednesday, I think March 13th. It's the Wednesday before the Georgetown thing and before my thing at the John Ferry Garden. Um, so there's that one, and then if you're in the Beaumont area, the Beaumont Photo Club, I'm doing an event for them in June. For either one of those things, if you're in an area and you're interested, you can either message me or I'll be posting something soon on my social media. If you've noticed, if you follow me on Instagram, I've been a lot less active on Instagram. We were discussing this earlier. It's just changed so much that I'm just not excited about being on there as much as I used to be. And the way that I've gotten really busy with other stuff photography wise, it's hard to justify taking time away to do something that's just kind of used to be for fun and that isn't as fun anymore. Uh, but uh, but I know I still utilize it as a way to get the word out. But having said that, I find myself gravitating more towards Facebook these days for particularly for information like that, putting out announcements. I feel like that I seem to get a little bit more traction there with people actually responding to what I post as opposed to or notifying people about things that I have available or when I'm doing shows. So.
Why
Um,
don't you, before you get off here, why don't you put in the chat your Facebook, your business page, or whatever it is, and then I can link that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody wants to find you there. A lot of people, believe it or not, spend more time on Facebook than they do on Instagram. And sometimes it's vice versa. I like, personally, I live on Instagram, but a lot more people tend to use Facebook. All right,
Yeah,
Jose.
and I think it's a age thing as well, probably.
Oh, yes, that's exactly what it is. You're so old.
I am. I'll be 54 this year, and so that's the thing that I'm noticing with um and I knew that already from years ago, especially like with the gym business. I knew that that was one of the things that they would tell you is that Instagram was more for your younger crowd and Facebook was more for your soccer moms and up, and so the same thing I think I'm finding true with this as well that with photography and particularly with the type of photography that I do, I know that it appeals more to, people that are 35 and up versus, the younger crowd. So I'm sure
You
that's
know
a little
your
part.
you know your people. Find your
I
people.
do.
All right, let me close this out by saying thank you very much for coming. And it's always a joy to it was fun for me because I got to visit with you before everybody jumped on. So that was a treat for me. So thank you for that time. All right, next week, Stephen Mack returns with his presentation, Creating a Fantastical Concert Poster. If you're at all interested in more of the graphic design and using Photoshop, you want to be here because Stephen Mack is such a good teacher, and he's gonna, I don't want to say dumb it down, but he's gonna make it really easy for you to understand what he's doing. And he is extremely creative and talented. So I hope that you join us for that. And until next time, go out and create something beautiful. And I hope that we see you again soon.